and a makeshift kitchen. Not all the old men are Rastas, but the majority are. They range from, I'd say, 40 to 70. There's never fewer than 3. They wait the night with one another. They don't fall asleep. God doesn't have to wake them and say, "Could you not keep me company in my madness?" Jamaicans don't do small talk. At first, this is a bit uncomfortable because Irish people are always filling the gaps. I find myself in silence in fish-filled vans making deliveries, just like I did with my grandfather. I thought they didn't like me was why they were silent, but it ain't anything other than they are watchers. They are watching out for God everywhere. They're like God's security detail. That's how they see themselves, and that is exactly how they are. They're like Saint Michael leading God's angels to war against Satan. Like zillions of St. Michaels, all rolled into one huge pyre of prophecy. They're watching for the devil too. That's the enemy of God. The devil is their Lee Harvey Oswald. They only speak when it's about scripture. In the backs of their stores, they call me Sista or Data as they hand me saucers of food. Start small, they say. It worries them I don't eat. I've just never been an eater. My blood is too anxious. The elders don't eat meat, but they eat fried fish and sweet potatoes and rice and peas. Rice and peas is actually rice and kidney beans cooked in coconut milk. Best thing a person could eat. I'm glad because I particularly hate peas unless I'm playing that game where each person puts a frozen pea in one nostril and holds the other nostril closed, and whoever manages to snot the pea out furthest is the winner. The elders can't say Ireland. They call it Ireland. They read from the Nevi'im, the biblical prophets, while I turn my face and scoff, secretly loving the food, but also feeling that painful humiliation from childhood that comes when I register hunger. It's too connected with my mother. I can't accept it. Food turns to pebbles in my mouth. Like Lot's wife looking back, I resist it, as if to prove I'm totally in God's hands. But the elders are right, and they stress good food, not just food. They wouldn't spoon more to me, laughing softly at the backs of their throats with pleasure when they see I've cleaned the saucer. They actually do treat me like a stray kitten. They say my whiskers are as white as theirs. When I trust them, they decide to teach me. They do this without my even realizing it's being done. They don't sit me down and say this, that, or the other. They do it by the things they talk about with one another when I'm present. They read from the book of Revelation and loudly discuss the fact it's about the end of religion, hopping about laughing for joy, yelling Jah and Rastafari and Dread-Eye, with their arms up in the air as if the prophecy has already been fulfilled. The one thing they do direct at me is discussion of Ireland. Hinglan is a natural enemy of Ireland, you know see that? I reply I'd have to be blind not to see it. They tell me, and the Pope are the devil, so the devil are the real enemy. They tell me, Jah dwelling shall be on earth among the human race. In Terry's juice bar, there's a Rasta painting on the wall. There's an altar at the end of a long black and white tiled cathedral floor. A skinny black king with the kindest face imaginable is seated on a massive golden throne replete with Amraic inscriptions. There are dark-skinned elders seated on both sides along the length of the floor, misted. You can't tell who they are, lions or ancient souls. A tiny woman in a white shift is standing at the foot of the throne, facing the emperor. Her right hand is outstretched. She's asking him to come into the city. His dais is so high above her, she reaches only to his knees. He relaxes in his chair and leans back on his elbow, tilting his head forward, smiling kindly. Her skin is white and her head is shaved. One early evening while I'm in New York to rehearse for Saturday Night Live, I'm gazing at the painting when suddenly Terry gestures for everyone to leave except me. Then he closes the shop door, pulls the shutters down quickly and asks me to sit beside him right there on the floor. His face looks sorrowful as he takes my hands in his. He has something to tell me. He says he wants me to try to forgive him. He tells me that he's soon gonna get killed. He says someone tried to kill him before in a drive-by. He was in his car with some friends. Another car rolled up beside them and they shot at him 7 times. He says they'll get him eventually. I ask him why, and I can't bear the answer I get. He runs guns and drugs. He's been using kids as mules. They have guns and drugs in their school bags, not books. He's moved in on someone's territory, and it's only a matter of time. I'm horrified by what he's been doing and that he's going to be murdered. There is much pacing in the juice bar over the course of the week. That Friday night, he gives me a gold ring with a red oval stone on which is carved most finely a Roman soldier's head. Fucking treacherous bastard. I could kill him myself. Not a Rasta on earth would touch 7,000 pounds of weed if it had a Roman soldier on it. Never mind bejewel themselves with such a thing. I give it to Rufus, another Rasta, who, picking it up from my palm, repeatedly asks why. He thinks maybe I mean romance. I don't. I mean the soldier looks like him. Silly fucker takes this as a compliment. I realise in that millisecond what the rabbi meant back in London when he said don't forget to leave the party before they all get drunk and start fighting. I climb the 3 heavy steps up from the shop onto St. Mark's Place, turn left onto Avenue A and hail myself a cab. The driver, softly clicking his tongue against his back teeth as if he were calling a puppy, pleads with me to consider having sex with him. I don't know where he imagines we're going to do it, certainly not in the front seat. To say he's consumed a few too many patties would be an understatement. We're talking American XXXL. I decline, informing him I've had a very unsexy evening. Sweetly, he sings me Underneath the Mango Tree to cheer me up as we push through the lights of Manhattan to my other world, wherein I pace the fluffy floors of my hotel suite until 6 a.m. War, Part 2. Gotta serve somebody. The day my mother died, myself and my siblings went inside her house for the first time in several years. Our own secrets to seek, not hers. There were still broken plastic swans in the bathroom, resolute, long-necked, frozen as if nothing had happened. I took down from her bedroom wall the only photo she ever had up there, which was of Pope John Paul II. It was taken when he visited Ireland in 1979. "Young people of Ireland," he had said after making a show of kissing the ground at Dublin Airport like the flight had been overly frightening. "I love you." What a load of claptrap. Nobody loved us, not even God. Sure, even our mothers and fathers couldn't stand us. In 1978, Bob Geldof ripped up a photo of Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta on Top of the Pops because their shit record Summer Nights had been #1 for 7 weeks, and finally Geldof's Boomtown Rat single Rat Trap had taken over. My intention had always been to destroy my mother's photo of the Pope. It represented lies and liars and abuse. The type of people who kept these things were devils like my mother. I never knew when or where or how I would destroy it, but destroy it I would when the right moment came. And with that in mind, I carefully brought it everywhere I lived from that day forward, because nobody ever gave a shit about the children of Ireland. I've woken after going to bed at 6 a.m. It's 1 p.m., only a few hours until camera rehearsal for SNL. I'm to perform 2 songs, the second of which is Bob Marley's War, a cappella. The lyric is actually a speech given to the United Nations by the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie in New York in 1963 about racism being the cause of all wars. But I'm going to change a few lines to be a declaration of war against child abuse because I'm pissed at Terry for what he told me last night, and I'm pissed he's been using kids to run drugs, and I'm pissed he's going to be dead by Monday. It also happens I've been pissed off for a few weeks because I've been reading The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, a contrarian, blasphemous history of the early church. But also, I found a tiny article buried in the back pages of an Irish newspaper about families whose children had been abused by priests, but whose stories were not believed by the police, who had lost their files, in inverted commas. So I've been thinking even more of destroying my mother's photo of JP2. And I decide tonight is the night. I bring the photo to the NBC studio and hide it in the dressing room. At the rehearsal, when I finish singing Bob Marley's War, I hold up a photo of a Brazilian street kid who was killed by cops. I ask the cameraman to zoom in on the photo during the actual show. I don't tell him what I have in mind for later on. Everyone's happy. A dead child far away is no one's problem. I know if I do this there'll be war, but I don't care. I know my scripture. Nothing can touch me. I reject the world. Nobody can do a thing to me that hasn't been done already. I can sing in the streets like I used to. It's not like anyone will tear my throat out. Showtime. I'm wearing a white lace dress that once belonged to Sade. I bought it at a rock and roll auction in London when I was 19. Paid £800 for it. It's beautiful. There's a coin-size lead weight in each side of the slit at the back to keep it straight and make it hang ladylike. Very clever. A dress for women to behave badly in. One day maybe I will have a daughter who gets married in it. So the show goes on. First song, Success Has Made a Failure of Our Home, is a dream. Plenty of people milling about backstage afterwards. Producers, managers, makeup artists, and fellow guests. I'm the flavour of the month. Everyone wants to talk to me, tell me how I'm a good girl, but I know I'm an imposter. Second song is set up beautifully, with one candle beside me and my Rasta prayer cloth tied to the microphone. I sing War, a cappella. No one suspects a thing. But at the end, I don't hold up the child's picture. I hold up JP2's photo and then rip it into pieces. I yell, "Fight the real enemy!" I'm talking to those who are going to kill Terry. And I blow out the candle. Total stunned silence in the audience. And when I walk backstage, literally, not a human being is in sight. All doors have closed, everyone has vanished, including my own manager, who locks himself in his room for 3 days and unplugs his phone. Everyone wants a pop star, see? But I'm a protest singer. I just had stuff to get off my chest. I had no desire for fame. In fact, that's why I chose the first song. Success was making a failure of my life. Because everybody was already calling me crazy for not acting like a pop star, for not worshipping fame. And I understand I've torn up the dreams of those around me, but those aren't my dreams. No one ever asked me what my dreams were. They just got mad at me for not being who they wanted me to be. My own dream is only to keep the contract I made with God before I ever made one with the music business, and that's a better fight than murder. I got to get to the other side of life. I am in my dressing room with my personal assistant, Kira. We pack up my bags and leave the building. Outside 30 Rock, 2 young men are waiting for me, and they throw a load of eggs at us both. But what they don't know is myself and Kira are able to run 100 meters in 11.3 seconds, so we run after them when they flee. We catch up with them in some alley. They are leaning, gasping for breath against a black fence they didn't have the strength to climb. All we say laughing at them is, "Hey, don't be throwing eggs at women." The two of them are so shocked at being chased and caught that they start laughing too, and it all ends very friendly. They straighten up and help us find a cab back to the hotel. The matter is being discussed on the news, and we learn that I'm banned from NBC for life. This hurts me a lot less than rapes hurt those Irish children, and a lot less than Terry dying, which happens on the following Monday morning anyway. It ain't necessarily so. A lot of people say or think that tearing up the Pope's photo derailed my career. That's not how I feel about it. I feel that having a #1 record derailed my career, and my tearing the photo put me back on the right track. I had to make my living performing live again, and that's what I was born for. I wasn't born to be a pop star. You have to be a good girl for that, not be too troubled. I wasn't comfortable with what other people call success, because it meant I had to be as others wanted me to be. After Saturday Night Live, I could just be me, do what I love, be imperfect, be mad even, anything. I don't define success as having a good name or being wealthy. I define success by whether I keep the contract I made with the Holy Spirit before I made one with the music business. I never signed anything that said I would be a good girl. I have supported my 4 children for 35 years. I supported us by performing live, and I became, if I may say so, a very fine live performer. So, far from the Pope episode destroying my career, it set me on a path that fit me better. I'm not a pop star. I'm just a troubled soul who needs to scream into mics now and then. I don't need to be #1. I don't need to be liked. I don't need to be welcome at the AMAs. I just need to pay my yearly overheads, get shit off my chest, and not compromise or prostitute myself spiritually. So no, I wasn't derailed. I was re-railed. And I feel I've been extremely successful as a single mother providing for her children. My condition is in 1992, a few days later. So I checked into the Chelsea Hotel this morning. It happens that none other than D.D. Ramone lives there, and he knocks on my door, bearing not a pie or a cake, but a few tabs of acid, and asks me would I like to partake. I don't tell him I've never done it before, and I scarf down one tab while he scarfs down another. I notice he is very underweight. Doesn't seem he cares for food any more than I do, which is pretty much not at all. We go wandering into the streets of the city, heading we know not where, and dancing to the music being played in various cabs we pass. We even stick our heads into one driver's open window because he's stuck in a traffic jam and blaring Ella Fitzgerald. He shows us the CD cover. She's all in pink and smiling. I hold the cover and read everything on it, both sides, like Aunt Frances taught me to. Clearly, this is not Dee first rodeo when it comes to taking drugs, and his head is fucked. After an hour or two, he plonks himself on a step somewhere and starts acting like Sybil in the eponymous movie about multiple personalities. The people, the people, the people. He thinks everyone is staring at him. They aren't. Or if they are, it's just because he looks like he's going to pass out. He decides to go back to the Chelsea Hotel and leave me on my own. I don't mind this arrangement. It means I'm free to go to St. Mark's and Avenue A, which I duly do. I meet my friend Rabbi at Terry's place. I don't know his real name. He's nicknamed Rabbi because he's always talking about God. He's a fiery Rasta-looking type, but very angry. Not a real Rasta. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he's bumped off a few people. He has a nasty streak in him. Sometimes I don't know why I hang out with him. I think it's only that he's interesting. He and I head to the park. It's still daytime. I find myself smiling at strangers. Acid is like that, turns you back into a child, so you're open to people the way you were when you were small. A blonde lady is smiling back at me, sitting with her husband or whatever he is. I realise I must leave Rabbi and go back to the Irish bar when he starts feeling my hands in a manner that suggests he fancies a lap or two in the labba, Irish for bed. I'm uninterested. I don't feel that way about him. Who wants to go to bed with someone so grumpy? After that night, I don't do acid again until I'm 33, in a rockabilly club on London's Oxford Street with my friend BP Fallon, an Irish radio host. He loves rockabilly music. I can't bloody stand it. So I'm begging him, can we please leave the club? He insists we have to stay. I'm stone cold sober after an hour, so I figured the acid is crap. As crap as the music. And I steal Beep's, his nickname is Beep, whole bag of acid, lock myself in the toilet and scarf up the lot while he's banging on the door threatening to kill me when I exit. I'm laughing my head off as I eat every tab in the bag. Still, I'm sober as a judge after another hour. Nothing is happening. This is not acid. It's just some little cardboard squares, and Beep has clearly been ripped off. Still, he won't leave the club, and we end up staying there for a total of 3 hours. Finally, about midnight, he says we can go. Well, as soon as my right foot hits Oxford Street, whoosh, I'm flying. The music hadn't let me trip because I hated it. I didn't know until this night how deep my relationship to music is. Cry laughing, my favourite feeling in the world, and fascinated by the stars. We go to my house and light the fire. A fire looks like it's made of maggots when you're on acid. It's the weirdest thing. Makes me wonder if everything is secretly made of maggots. I get obsessed with letting the garden into the house and fling open all the windows in case it decides to accept my invitation. Never happens, of course. We just sit all night talking. At one point, a bunch of flowers on my piano vanishes before my eyes, and all I see is the word monster. But as soon as I realise that's just some bullshit in my mind, the flowers reappear and start dancing. So I learned to control my mind on acid far better than I could without it. I did ecstasy a few times, hated it, crying the next day for anyone's mother curled up in a fetal position. Same with coke. Twice I did it, hated it. Next day crying like a cartoon. The tears not falling down my face but flying straight, horizontally. Nothing nice about it. Depressed and $20 poorer. Not worth it at all. Took my manners. Heroin I smoked once. It was disgusting. Never did it again. Next drug I did was speed in the nut house, believe it or not, in Dublin. I get to call it a nut house because I'm a nut. No one else gets to call it that. In the locked ward where they put you if you're suicidal, there's more Class A drugs than in Shane McGowan's dressing room. They never check the bags visitors bring. It's not like in America, where even your granny would be frisked up against a wall and chucked out if she brought you so much as a bottle of perfume. So yeah, I'm on speed in there for 1 week, probably one of the happiest weeks of my life. Same thing 2 years later. 1 week on speed in the locked ward of the nut house. It made me want to write. I wish I had some now, in fact, but I vowed never to take it again because I loved it so much. Alcohol and me have never been friends. I'm allergic. I just vomit. I must be the only Irish person in the world who doesn't drink. Last time I got drunk, I was about 23, again in New York, on St. Patrick's Day in the Fitzpatrick Hotel, where plyboard had been nailed to the floor in the bar to protect the carpet from puking rowdy paddies who had come from Ireland just to get drunker than skunks. Irish coffee it was, with horrible creme de menthe shamrocks squirted on top. Well, I hugged the toilet all night while the room spun and I puked, and I was so tired but couldn't sleep because of all the coffee. I was still puking the next day, and I've not touched a drop of alcohol since. I found all these drugs very easy to abandon, for which I am very lucky. It's weed I wasn't sober on. On weed, I was always working, and I loved it, because I could stay in my own world when the world outside me didn't make sense. Most musicians love weed because it turns up the music inside you and helps you cope with all the hanging around doing nothing. It being the case that weed makes doing nothing interesting. Hotels, dressing rooms, buses, airports, working 2.5 hours of the day, the rest spent relentlessly waiting. Yes, weed I've liked too much. Homeless man at Easter. The most incredible human being I ever met was a homeless man whose name I didn't even get. Forgive me if that rhymes. It was not long before my Saturday Night Live appearance on Good Friday in a diner full of white people in New York. In the door came this African American man wearing a long army-type trench coat and around his neck a jack-to-jack lead, which is a lead that connects a guitar to an amp. I was sitting at the bar part of the diner, and all the other white eaters were sitting in their booths, and this man wasn't fit for their company. So the boss of the diner turned him round and walked him out, and I was quite shocked, because this is not something that would happen in my own country. Next minute, about 5 minutes later, rather, he returned, and he did what I thought was the most incredible thing for a human being to do. He came back into the restaurant, stood about 6 feet inside, opened up his arms and said, "Can I get a hug? Can I just get a hug?" Genius, I thought, and I ran up to him and leapt on him like a monkey. And I was the only person who did. I jumped into his arms and hung on to him as if I were a baby, wrapping my legs around his waist. I hung on to him for a very long time. We then went outside and had some conversation. I can't remember what we talked about, but afterward he gave me the jack-to-jack lead that he had around his neck. It has been lost somewhere in some house move at some point, but it was a treasured possession of mine for a long time afterward. I had it hung on my bedroom wall, and I often think about him. What a genius. Can I get a hug? War, Part 3, October 1992. I'm so excited. I get to sing at the Madison Square Garden concert celebrating Bob Dylan's recording career. I think I've been asked because I've said in every interview I've ever done that he's been a huge influence on me, spiritually speaking. His song, "Gotta Serve Somebody," is my roadmap for what kind of artist I want to be. Not just an entertainer, but an activist. Indeed, I wouldn't have ripped up the Pope's picture 2 weeks ago if not for that song and what it says musicians must do. At the rehearsal the day before, Willie Nelson sidles up to me and asks if I will record Peter Gabriel's "Don't Give Up" with him the day after the show. I'm thrilled. If my mother wasn't already dead, she would die. She loved Willie Nelson so bad. The song I'm to perform at Madison Square is "I Believe in You" from Bob's album Slow Train Coming. When the album was released, I had not seen my father for some time because my mother was preventing it, and the courts in Ireland were shitty to fathers, so I was without elder male guidance, and the album became my father figure. When I first try to sing "I Believe in You," I cry my eyes out. It means that much to me. I always know I'm going to sing a song well if at first it makes me blubber. Same thing happened with Streets of London. Had to run out of the room 3 times. Same thing with Don't Cry for Me Argentina and Scarlet Ribbons. Some songs, you just even think about them, you cry, like America the Beautiful. Anyway, because I get so emotional, Booker T and his band, who were the house band for the night, and myself, come up with what is a very soft and whispered version, vocally speaking. There won't be a dry eye in the house. And all I want is for Bob to be proud of it. Morning of the show, I buy an outfit from Bergdorf Goodman, only because I like the colour, turquoise, because turquoise represents communication in the world of mediumship. I don't try the outfit on at the store, and when I get back to the hotel, I don't try it on for hours. When I finally don it and look in the mirror, I see it's really for someone in the television show Dynasty. You gotta have a bouffant to get away with these shoulder pads, and I'm bald as an egg. And the matching skirt shows my hideous ballet legs. I look ridiculous and very underweight because I rarely eat. But it's 5 o'clock now and it's too late to find something else. So I tell myself the mediumship of the colour is all that matters. And I know it's true. But when I walk on stage that night and half the audience starts booing, for a second I actually think it's the outfit, because in my excitement at being part of the show, I've forgotten all about the Pope photo incident on Saturday Night Live. Then the other half of the audience begins cheering to fight off the booers, and there ensues a noise the likes of which I've never heard and can't describe, other than to say it's like a thunderclap that never ends. The loudest noise I've ever heard, like a sonic riot, as if the sky is ripping apart. It makes me feel really nauseous and almost bursts my eardrums. And for a minute or two, I'm not sure the audience members aren't going to actually riot. They're clashing so badly already with their voices. How do I know what else might happen? I pace a while on stage. I realise that if I start the song, I'm fucked, because the vocal is so whispered. Both sides of the audience's battle are going to drown me out, and I can't afford not to be heard. The booers will take it as a victory. I look at Booker T's beautiful face. He's mouthing the words, "Sing the song," but I don't. Now I'm asking God, what should I do? I keep pacing, which becomes uncomfortable for everyone backstage, because the show's got to go on as planned. So someone dispatches Chris Christopherson, this he tells me later, to, quote, get her off the stage, unquote. As he's making his way there, I get my answer from God. I'm to do what Jesus would do. So I literally scream the biggest rage I can muster, the Bob Marley song War, to which I tore up the Pope's picture, and then I almost get sick. I see Christopherson walking up to me. I'm thinking, I don't need a man to rescue me, thanks. It's so embarrassing. Don't let the bastards get you down, he says into my mic, and we go off stage and I almost barf on him as he gives me a hug. Afterward, I feel like Bob Dylan is the one who should have come out and told his audience to let me sing, and I'm pissed that he didn't. So I glare at him in the wings, as if he's my big brother who's just told my parents I skipped school. He stares back at me, baffled. He's looking all handsome in his white shirt and pants. It's the weirdest 30 seconds of my life. The day after Madison Square Garden, I go to visit Dylan's manager in his office. I tell him about what's been happening in the church in Ireland, that kids have been raped and the church is covering it up. I ask if he and Dylan will help expose it. He thinks I'm crazy, offers no help. Neither he nor Dylan are going to speak up for me. I'm on my own. I wonder if they still think I'm crazy now. My father, who was in the audience that night, advises me afterward that it might be time for me to reconsider college because I just destroyed my career. He's right, but I don't care. Some things are worth losing your career for. And I don't want a pop star career anymore anyway, because nobody knows me and I'm so lonely. My Star-Spangled Banner. The blowback after Saturday Night Live was stronger than it had been a couple of years earlier with another controversy. It's 1990, and over the past few days I've seen some news footage in my hotel rooms that's made me cry, laugh. I'm on tour in America, and in some towns and cities, people have been steamrolling piles of my albums at intersections. Bring us your Sinead O'Connor album and we'll crush it for you, has been the arrangement. Forward, reverse, over the little hills of CDs, intensely angry old people with very pointy noses operating the steamrollers. I don't think I've ever seen anything so funny, nor has the Irish artist in me ever been more proud, especially today, when wearing a pair of sunglasses and a wig outside the venue at New York's Saratoga Performing Arts Centre, between soundcheck and showtime, I had the great joy of joining with my best friend Kira in a protest against myself. In fake American accents, we chatted with the 5 or so Vietnam veterans who were the only people who had turned up at a protest promoted by a local disc jockey. They were large, shall we say, all male, and 3 of them were wearing black-framed, enormous round spectacles with lenses so thick their eyes looked humongous. They had painstakingly made and were proudly carrying placards that left no one in any doubt that they felt I should leave America immediately, and that all Sinead O'Connor loves about America is the dollar. Needless, I hope, to point out they were mistaken. Only an Egypt wouldn't love America. Plus, only an Egypt would leave America for any reason other than deportation. Whatever else I might be fairly or otherwise accused of, I am a gazillion% secure in my status as a non-Egypt. More now than ever, because if I were an Egypt, no one would need to be steamrollering my records. This is a very good thing. Kira and myself agreed passionately with the protesters that Sinead O'Connor and her ilk should get back to Ireland, and that she is just an evil woman trying to corrupt our kids with her disrespect, that no way can she be a Christian. We even had our pictures gloriously taken with them for their scrapbooks. They were so proud that 2 such nice young ladies would support them, poor creatures. After 20 minutes or so, we ladies clambered onto a wooden fence and just sat watching them continue to do their thing, walking up and down with the placards. A news crew had turned up because elements of the media had been trying to drum up a huge protest in the previous days, but as it happened, that failed, and the guys were the only protesters for them to film. Next thing we know, a local female TV reporter, brunette, wearing 6 years' worth of makeup, wanders over to us with her cameraman and her sound guy, who's carrying a ridiculously phallic, fuzzy microphone above her head. "Excuse me, miss, are you from around here?" she asks. I decide to say, for a very long time, and then I venture, "I'm from Saratoga." Kira and me both try not to snot laughing or look at each other. "What's your name?" the reporter asks. I prefer never to give my name to strangers," I say, and we barely manage not to fall off the fence. Luckily, they went away quickly. We were too bizarre. But they ran it later on the news with the caption, "Is that her?" running and rerunning the footage of my interview. This silliness all transpired because a couple of months back, before I was to go on stage in some venue in New Jersey, 2 Caucasians, as they say in America, 1 male and 1 female, came to my dressing room. They asked me how would I feel about the Star-Spangled Banner, the American national anthem, being played through the speakers before I perform. Now, mea culpa, but because where I come from we speak English, I gleaned from the phrasing of their question and from the fact that they put it as a question at all, that what they were saying was if I didn't feel cool about it, that would be cool. No American anthem, no problem. Between you and me, anthems have petrifyingly contagious associations with squareness, unless they're being played by Jimi Hendrix. Also, for the most part, people come to shows so they can forget about the outside world, not be reminded of it. But I had about 10 minutes till stage time, and I needed to get my wires down the back of my shirt and take the usual last few panic pees. So I said that given the choice, I'd prefer it wasn't played. I didn't give them any explanation, They sweetly smiled and said that was just fine and that I should have a great show. But the whole thing was an extraordinary setup. While I was on stage, the two Sleeveens called a local television news show and created a nationwide fuss by falsely reporting that I had sawed them out and demanded the anthem not be played before the show. They also claimed that I told them I would not go on if it was played, which is entirely untrue. One's tour insurance would never cover one for such a decision. I told you I'm no idiot. Media frenzy ensues. Sinead, the hater of America, right at the height of my tour. MC Hammer, cashing in on the whole thing, publicly sends me a cheque for a first-class ticket back to Ireland. The cheque, like him, reeks of coconut. Even I can see it's also cavalier businessmanning on his part. Years from now, the thing is going to be worth a lot more than the $1,500 or so he's written it for. Actually, come to think of it, there is one reason to leave America. MC Hammer's videos. Christ almighty. Frank Sinatra weighs in and opines I should have my ass kicked, which is worrying because I'm staying in the same hotel as him. We might happen across each other in the lift, and I'm thinking my father back in Dublin isn't going to be too pleased if I tell him I had to, in self-defence, beat the crap out of old Blue Eyes. I start checking my bed for horse heads. I'm feeling flattered that the establishment considers me enough of a threat that it needs to try to discredit me, along with all the other bands and artists who have been under attack in this censorship of music that is America since Straight Outta Compton. Clearly we're all onto something, and clearly we've all been onto it all along. I know what it is too. We're like the mirror in Snow White. Part 3. Some musical notes. I'm certain part of the reason I became a singer was that I couldn't become a priest, given that I had a vagina and a pair of breasts, however insignificant. I always had an interest in working with dying people, because I was always a person who believed very much in an afterlife, and in the lack of need to fear death, which I discerned from having had the Gospels drilled into me. I figured that was Jesus' reason for coming to earth. That seemed to sink in to such a degree that only now, as I'm writing about my songs, have I become aware that an awful lot of them are about death, or talking to dying people, or where the narrator is a dead person. The very first song that I ever wrote, in fact, Take My Hand, featured an angel singing to a dying old man, "Come with me, everything's going to be rosy." It was an unusual subject for a 14-year-old to be writing about. I've written a lot in this book about my upbringing and my youth and how it is I came to be an artist, but I have not yet written much about the individual songs or albums. I thought it might be useful to relate all the information that I can concerning those. I always say that if one could discuss music, one wouldn't need music, since music is for the things that cannot be discussed. Please be aware that every album represents a diary, and each song is a chapter in that diary, and my collection of albums represents my healing journey. When I was younger, I wrote from a place of pain, because I needed to get things off my chest. Once I came to the theology album, which is all scripture, I worked from a place of healing. And the first album I wrote totally from that platform is I'm Not Bossy, I'm the Boss. And it is from that platform I continue to write. After all, there's no point setting out on a healing journey if you're not going to find yourself healed. And it is also the case that if anyone wants to truly know me, the best way is through my songs. There is nothing I could write in this book or tell you that would help you to get to know me. It's all in the songs. I do not want what I haven't got. Jackie was the song I remember writing after Take My Hand. I was about 15, and it ended up on The Lion and the Cobra. I had seen a play on TV about a very old lady in Scotland who was coming toward her own death. She would spend her days looking through her curtained window, waiting to see her long-gone husband return from a fishing trip he had taken 40 years earlier, and during which he had drowned. They had been childless, and she had never met anyone else. This inspired me somehow to write Jackie, about a character who is wandering the beach, waiting for the return of someone dead. In my song, the narrator is a ghost. People always assume my songs are autobiographical, but that's true only about 50% of the time. They often guess wrong, especially when they presume a song is about mental illness, though this doesn't really apply to Jackie. It's interesting that this song falls into a category of lyrics sung from the point of view of people who have passed on. I seem to have had even then an interest in the afterlife, a non-belief in the finality of death that concerned me musically as well as spiritually. It is all, as I said, because I didn't get to be a priest. I should have been a missionary, in fact, but the next best thing was music. As I mentioned, Drink Before the War, I've no idea where the title came from, emerged from my anger at my headmaster in Waterford, who hated me wanting to be a musician. I didn't give a shit, and the headmaster was a snob and a cowardly little fucker. The song meant a lot to me when I wrote it, but I never perform it anymore because I feel embarrassed. Singing it is like reading your teenage diary out loud. I do still perform Never Get Old, also written when I was 15 or so, and also on my first album. It's about the handsomest boy in school, Ben Johnson. All the girls wanted to go out with him because he was not only the best-looking boy, but also the most mysterious. He trained hawks and was really sweet and rarely said a thing. As I wrote earlier, I finally got to go out with him. One day he took me to watch him and his hawk, and we had the most amazing afternoon. I think we eventually kissed once or twice, and then I got dumped, though it was done very nicely. I was probably a terrible kisser, but I was still quite upset, and that's where Never Get Old came from. Mandinka was inspired by the television series Roots, based on Alex Haley's novel about slavery. I was a young girl when I saw it, and it moved something so deeply in me I had a visceral response. I came to emotionally identify with the civil rights movement and slavery, especially given the theocracy I lived in and the oppression in my own home. Recording Mandinka was also a breakthrough for me musically. The recording was the first time I had the courage to play guitar properly. Chris Burkett, the producer, and Chris Hill from Ensign were very encouraging. The first time I played it for Chris Hill, I was sure he would think it was total shit. But as has often been my experience when I've gone to people with songs that I worried were absolute crap, such as Reason With Me, about a character asking to be helped with life, people loved them. And I was proud that I'd managed to play guitar, because, well, I'm not a great guitar player. When I remember the tracks on I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, I see again that the themes of death, dying, and communicating from the beyond are everywhere. In the first track, Feel So Different, I'm actually talking to my mother. And I Am Stretched on Your Grave, which is actually an old Irish poem, is very much about death. I used the famous James Brown drum track that was starting to appear on many rap tracks. The record company made me pay $50,000 for it, which I bet did not go to James Brown's drummer. I love singing it, and I always think about my mother when I do. Often when I'm on tour, someone well known has just died, and I dedicate Stretch on Your Grave to that person. A third death song is Three Babies, about 3 miscarriages that I experienced. It is also about the 4 children I did have, though the song is perhaps a prophecy of not being the perfect mother. You have dreams of being a perfect mother to your kids, but maybe you don't always turn out to be one. though you get better as you get older. Black Boys on Mopeds is based on a true story involving two young teenagers near where I lived in London. They had taken a cousin's moped without asking permission. The cops were called and gave chase. The boys got frightened, crashed, and died. This was at a time where there was a terrible scandal in London about black men going missing in police stations. It was a time in London also when, if a burglar was apprehended, he was reported as a black burglar, or alternatively an Irish burglar. There was a lot of tension created between Londoners on the one hand and Jamaicans and Irish on the other. The huge single from the album, my cover of Prince's Nothing Compares to You, was a song I was always and am always singing to my mother. Every time I perform it, I feel it's the only time I get to spend with my mother and that I'm talking with her again. There's a belief that she's there, that she can hear me, and I can connect to her. It's why I've cried on the line, "All the flowers that you planted, Mama, in the backyard, all died when you went away." I love the song and never get fed up singing it. The title track, "I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got," also came in a very dark and interesting way. I went to see a medium, and my mother came through. My mother asked my sister to forgive her for what she had done to all of us, but my sister would not forgive her. And while I understood this, it made me very, very sad for my mother's soul. I was so young and didn't know any better. That night I had a dream in which my mother came to me for the first time since she had died a year and a half earlier. In the dream, I told my mother I was sorry that Emer couldn't forgive her. My mother said, "I do not want what I haven't got." What my mother meant was that she didn't deserve my sister's forgiveness and that she knew she didn't deserve it, so that I shouldn't feel sorry for her. There's a lot going on around the issues of death and dying on my first and second albums. But I've also realised, there's an awful lot of songs about belief in the spirit world. It's not just, oh, whoa, these are miserable songs about death. It's not like that. There are songs that are concerned with the idea that the Gospels are indeed such, and the scriptures of old are true, and that there is no such thing as death, which is what all God's messengers have told us, no matter what religion they came from. Am I not your girl? I wasn't ready for the sort of success that came with I do not want what I haven't got. It wasn't what I was looking for. I did not know how to handle it. It did my head in. I didn't know why anyone liked my songs. Singing them in front of every camera in the world on every television show, I didn't know where I was. I wasn't with my kid. I didn't know who I was. I didn't feel comfortable in the whole pop star role and with what the whole thing was doing to me. I thought that musically I didn't want to be under the stress of a typical follow-up album. I really needed to come up with a red herring. I decided to buy myself some time so I'd be able to make the follow-up album I really wanted to make, not the one the record label demanded. A red herring follow-up album would be so far fucking removed from pop world expectations that nobody could compare it. So that's what I did with Am I Not Your Girl? The album is filled with show tunes and jazz standards. The only thing that has any personal input from me is Loretta Lynn's hit, "Success Has Made a Failure of Our Home," because that's really me talking about what success has done to my life. At the end, I made up some words that were very autobiographical. When the lyrics ran out, I suddenly started screaming, "Am I not your girl?" It was the only part of the album that I felt followed up, I do not want what I haven't got. I also covered Don't Cry For Me, Argentina, because my mother always loved that song, and it meant the world to me to sing it. And what meant the world to me too was a letter I got from Tim Rice, who wrote the lyrics, saying that my version was the best he had ever heard, hands down, and if my mother had not been already dead, she would have died of delight and pride. Scarlet Ribbons is on the album. It's a song my father used to sing to me when I was a kid. That's why I'm crying singing it. It's so deep and meaningful to me. And my father singing that song to me really told me about the power of prayer and that miracles could happen. I was so blown away by the story of the song. I guess my father had a very sad singing voice too, and he used to make me sad, the same way it made my daughter sad when I sang to her when she was little. When she heard my songs on the radio, she'd say, "Too sad, turn it off, turn it off." Universal Mother. I often think of Universal Mother as the most special album I ever made, for many, many reasons, one of which had to do with my father. He had been going for singing lessons for many years with a gentleman by the name of Frank Merriman, who taught a style of singing called bel canto. It literally means beautiful singing, and it came from Italy in the early 19th century. It has nothing to do with scales or breathing or any of that kind of stuff. The whole concept is that the emotions take you to the notes. When I lived in London and made my first 2 albums, I sang in an American accent. I sang like all of the people I idolized. I never sang like just me. It had been very uncool in the 1980s to sing with an Irish accent, and in fact, Bob Geldof was the first person to do it. I didn't begin to sing in an Irish accent until I went to see Frank Merriman as a student, which I did because I had dinner so often with him and my father when I happened to be in Dublin, and I was really impressed with what he had to say about singing. He described himself as a freer of voices, not a singing teacher, and he described singing as a spiritual study, which in his presence it really was. Studying with him led to the first time that I ever sang in my own voice, and I was able to say things that were really on my mind without having to code them as much as I had coded them in earlier albums. Frank freed more than just my voice, he freed my mind. In bel canto, you can't have one without the other. Frank would make you sing opera arias, such as Puccini's O mio babbino caro, in a key that was way too high for you. And just when it got to the highest note and you knew you were going to make an absolute show of yourself, he would throw an apple or a tennis ball at you, and you'd be so busy trying to either defend yourself from the thing or catch it that the note would come out of your body. It was his way of showing you that you were just in your own way. It was the Stanislavski method of singing. If you could just get yourself out of your own way, tell the story, feel the feelings, the notes were in you. Frank would say, "If a fire started in this room right now, you could yell 'fire' at the highest octave there is. But if you tried to sing that note when there was no fire, you wouldn't reach it." So bel canto is all about seeing the pictures, telling the story, really believing it, and believing that the notes will take you to the emotions. It's nothing to do with learning how to breathe, nothing to do with the diaphragm, none of that. The only technical part is you must always vocalize in your own accent, as everyone's muscles are formed by the age of 14, and these muscles form the sound of your accent. It follows that you're going to end up in vocal trouble if you constrict your accent. That's why you see Bono, you see Adele, you see certain performers who have put on a fake accent having vocal trouble. They've constricted their vocal cords to act in a way that they're not built for. In 1993, I moved back to Dublin to go to group vocal classes on Saturdays, as well as study privately with Frank. In the group classes, there were maybe 20 people. Some of them just wanted to sing at parties. Some of them wanted to sing professionally. Some of them just wanted the joy of going to a singing class, like my father. And you would learn there that everyone's soul is individual and beautiful, but the ring in everyone's soul doesn't come out unless they're singing in their own authentic accent, and that's what is really beautiful. It was from Frank's lessons that I developed a trick I sometimes still use on stage. I will tap my foot while performing, and I'll be thinking about my foot. I won't be thinking about the notes I have to sing, because if I think about the notes, I'm screwed. I think about anything but the notes I have to reach. It was during these lessons that I learned of the great sacrifices that the love of singing can lead a person to make. Frank is a man who at a young age went to Italy and lived on a park bench for a year because he couldn't afford a place to stay. He had only enough money to study there. Later, he came back to Dublin to be a teacher, thanks be to God. Now, as I said, it was Frank who began to teach me to sing in my own voice and find my own spirit. Consequently, I started to talk about the things I really wanted to talk about. And while Am I Not Your Girl was officially my third album, it was really a red herring. On Lion and the Cobra and I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, I sang about my upbringing, but I hadn't really said much. Now things would change. Which brings me back to Universal Mother from 1994. Most of the album was produced by Phil Coulter, who is a wonderful man whose 9 children were each born 9 months from the day that he got back from a tour. Phil is married to Geraldine Brannigan, a singer I admired very much growing up. Phil is a great piano player. He also wrote the song on the album called Scorn Not His Simplicity. One of the reasons I'm so proud of Universal Mother is that The Edge from U2 said he could listen to it only once. It was so personal. Nigel Grange, as I wrote, said the same thing about the album that has Nothing Compares to You on it, I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got. He said it was like reading someone's diaries and that nobody would be interested. I think poor Edge felt differently. It was more that he felt all the pain in it. Universal Mother also received the best review an album of mine has ever gotten, written by the late Bill Graham, who worked for an Irish magazine called Hot Press. His review said it was the first time that anybody was singing about their family and that the topic of family was always taboo. But an artist like me, that's what I've been trying to get at all along. That's what I was getting at. But of course I was now singing in a different accent, acting like somebody else. It was all heavily coded, and it was obvious that this was a vulnerable girl and not necessarily the tough Bambi and bobber boots that everyone thought. Now, I must admit, I have never been so stoned in my life as I was in Amsterdam with Tim Simonon, who produced the tracks Fire on Babylon, Famine, and Thank You for Hearing Me. Jesus, we smoked a lot of weed. I don't know how I managed to stay up on 2 feet, never mind sing. Fire on Babylon is a song about my mother. I won't go into too much detail, but it had to do with something I found out she'd done to one of my brothers that just made me really angry. Truth to tell, it's very hard for me to get angry about my mother. It's the way I've survived. I've convinced myself she didn't know what she was doing. People will do that, but of course I've misplaced that anger, and it might be more mature for me to accept it. You could tell even from the video how furious with her I was as I presented the poor mother figure with a birthday cake that blows up in her face. I love John, I Love You very much, love everything about it. People often think I wrote it about my brother John, but I didn't, though I do associate it with him sometimes. Here's the backstory. I had a piano teacher at Frank Merriman's school, John Stokes, who I was madly in love with. Of course, he wasn't interested in me at all, because he was quite sensible and knew that I was completely out of my mind, that I was the last woman that any man should wish upon himself. Still, we were friends and I was really fond of him, loved him very, very much. I couldn't play piano and still can't. I've 2 elbows for hands when it comes to playing guitar, really, or piano. Worse with piano, though. Anyway, John Stokes is actually who the song is about. My Darling Child is a song about my son Jake, just really a lullaby and a love song. Of course, Jake has his own song on the record for which he has a publishing deal called Am I a Human? He was only about 3, but he walked up to a microphone at his dad's house, and suddenly out of him comes this incredible philosophy. Red Football relates to the fact that this album was the first time in my life that I'd become myself and started to really look at what I'd been in the first 22 years of my life. It was finally dawning on me. A Perfect Indian is a song about Daniel Day-Lewis. People think we had an affair, but we never did. We were getting very friendly until I blew the friendship by losing my temper with him one night in a crazy way that I do sometimes. One of the effects of my childhood, unfortunately, so the song is as much about my upbringing as it is about Daniel. At the time, he was making the movie The Last of the Mohicans, so that's why it's called A Perfect Indian. It's not that I was in love with him, I wasn't, but I was very fond of him as a friend. We're still very fond of each other, though I've seen him once in the last maybe 25 years. The song All Babies is about the one and only rebirthing session that I ever went to, which completely blew my mind. It was like an acid trip, although I hadn't yet been on an acid trip, and I had the most magical experience. This song also influenced the painting on the album, which is the only cover art that I've ever done. That makes me wonder, where is that original drawing? Could it be it's lost somewhere in the depths of Chrysalis or EMI? Or it's been sold or something? But I certainly would like it back. Thank You for Hearing Me, the final song on Universal Mother, I wrote about breaking up with Peter Gabriel. I had had an on and off fling with him in which I was basically weekend pussy. That would be the kindest way to describe it. And once I got fed up with being weekend pussy, I wrote this sort of split-up song. But it became over the years my favourite song to perform live because it could just take you like a mantra to these stratospheres of almost hypnosis. I believe that Tim Simonon gave me the backing track. The entire band, every line, the bass line, the drums, the audience, we would all be in a trance with its repetition. It's very hard for me to describe where the song came from. It's quite a churchical, for want of a better word, experience performing it. And I'm very, very proud of it as a breakup song, considering the fact that one is entitled to smash plates when one realises one is being treated as weekend pussy. As for Famine, yes, I do remember going on a TV show in London and trying to perform that song in the midst of political tensions between Ireland and England. I was told that I shouldn't perform the song because it was too political. My folks said to the producer, "But hold on, if it was Bob Dylan here, you wouldn't say he couldn't perform The Times They Are A-Changin'." Nobody could do anything but agree. Eventually, we did get to perform it live on British TV at least once. Famine, of course, is a song about Ireland and how everyone believes there was a 19th century famine, but in fact, there was lots and lots of food in the country. It was just being shipped out of the country. It was just that you were shot dead if you were Irish and you went near anything but a potato. The fact is that to call it a famine is a lie. It was a controversial song, and if I had not written it, I would not have met my daughter's father, who wrote about it very well. John Waters is his name, and we met to do an interview about that song. If that song had not happened, our daughter, Roisin, would never have been born. Gospel Oak. Gospel Oak was named for the London neighbourhood where I was visiting a therapist 6 days a week. His name was Morton Schatzman, a very old Jewish psychiatrist whose dog used to sit at his feet licking its balls. It was so embarrassing while I was sitting there trying to explain what was wrong with me. What I liked about Dr. Schatzman was he said, "You come to therapy to find out there's nothing wrong with you." But there was certainly something wrong with me when his dog was licking its balls. I'm Irish, so I was kind of uncomfortable, to say the least. But I was very, very fond of this man. Maybe even madly in love with him in lots of ways, as one can often be with one's therapist. And he was the only person who was nice to me then. I was very lonely, which is why I was going there 6 days a week. Probably I was lonely because I was a difficult personality. I didn't realize that at the time. I was young. Also because of my job, I guess. Anyway, This Is to Mother You is the only song apart from All Babies that wrote itself. Sometimes artists will say they feel like they're channeling something, but I don't feel that's what it is. What you're channeling, if anything, is your subconscious, which can be talking to you. And you have to be very careful what you write, because all songwriters will tell you that songs always come true. I just heard it inside myself and picked it out on a guitar and sang it. A similar subconscious approach actually happened with all the tracks on Gospel Oak. I Am Enough for Myself was a meditation about things I was going through in therapy. It was a meditation and a set of affirmations about the way I wanted things to be. Petit Poulet was my reaction to the genocide in Rwanda. I was horrified by what I saw on TV, and this was my visceral reaction. And For My Love is just that, a love song. This Is a Rebel Song was written in response to U2's Sunday Bloody Sunday, which they would always introduce in performances with the words, "This is not a rebel song." Maybe they were afraid it would be perceived as being about the war in the north of Ireland. And I wanted listeners to know that this was not only a love song, but a song about the war. But how do you tell the story of a war? It's good if you can make it look like you're talking about the relationship between a man and a woman. He Moved Through the Fair, or She Moved Through the Fair, as it's usually called, is on this record as well. It's a beautiful old Irish song, a ghost, and no one even knows who wrote it. I re-recorded it in a much higher key for the movie Michael Collins, and I like that version a lot as well. Gospel Oak and Universal Mother are forever very linked for me because we toured the two albums together and we had the best fun on those tours. Faith and Courage. Faith and Courage, which came out in 2000, was my fifth original album and my first original release in many years. Making the album was a great artistic and revitalizing act. It had been a difficult time. I was raising Jake and Roisin, became entangled in a hideous, very depressing custody battle over her, and attempted suicide on my 33rd birthday. I had great relationships with Faith and Courage's many producers, especially Adrian Sherwood and Dave Stewart. In fact, myself and Adrian Sherwood were an item for a long time. I would work with Adrian on anything. I'd sing the phone book if he was recording it. He's the most incredible producer in the world, as well as the greatest builder of spliffs. He would build me one and write sweet little love notes on the side. On the record itself, The Healing Room is the same type of song as Thank You for Hearing Me. It's a mantra, and it takes people hopefully to another world. When I go on stage, I always pray that I can be a priest and that when I leave, people will feel like they've been at church. The Healing Room gives me that healing feeling. No Man's Woman is just your standard pop song, and Jealous I simply love. It's one of my favourite tracks I've ever done. I did that one with Dave Stewart. Also with Dave was Daddy I'm Fine. Dave had told me to go write a song about what it was like coming to London. I love performing it live because you just get to yell and scream. Hold Back the Night is one of the best vocals I've ever done. It was written by Bobby Bluebell of the Bluebells, and Dave Stewart found it for me to sing, and I don't think he could have found anything better. Dancing lessons I did with Wyclef Jean. That was very, very funny. He was kind of flirting with me for a moment until I had to say, "Don't be wasting time." I was forced to put The State I'm In on Faith and Courage by the record company. I absolutely hate it. I didn't write it. It's not the type of song that's in my personality. Frank Merriman had always taught me never to sing a song that wasn't in my personality, and here I bloody did, and I'm raging because I think it destroyed the album. The Lamb's Book of Life was produced by Shakespeare Bridge when I came to America to record some of the album. He didn't realise how depressed I was in Atlanta. He probably thought I was just the most boring bitch on earth, which I probably was, because all my complications back in London and Ireland were killing me. But The Lamb's Book of Life is really the story of that awful period. If You Ever is a song about my mother's death, an imaginary conversation between herself and myself. Emma's song is about my relationship with my daughter's father, John Waters, whom I spoke about earlier. And Kyrie eleison, well, that was just for mischief, a rastified version of the first section of the Catholic Mass. I had a great time making Faith and Courage because there were so many beautiful musicians and some of the most beautiful producers involved. As I've said, I can't remember many details because I was constantly stoned, and it was a risk working with so many different creative minds, so the fact that it all came together is simply amazing to me. Apart from the state I'm in, which I think is fucking terrible, I'm really, really proud of this record. Sean Nos Nua. Faith and Courage contains some of the best singing I ever did in my life. But the next album, Sean Nos Nua, Old Style New in Gaelic, contains the very best singing that I ever did in my life. It was a ghostly album, as these are many traditional Irish songs that no one can remember who wrote. So I feel they are like ghosts. You have to inhabit the character of these songs to bring them alive. Sean Nos Nua was recorded in the most ghostly of places, and the strangest of events took place around the making of this album. We recorded in a very strange house in the countryside, where there was what we call in Ireland a haunted tree. It was almost an evil tree. Not long after we made the album, the child of the house, a very small baby, died. It was all really sad. These are sad songs, of course, because nobody in Ireland ever writes a happy fucking song. However, the songs on the album are very beautiful. It was produced by Donal Lunny, as was my third child, Shane. If we had not made this album, we would not have made our beautiful son. I also again got Adrian Sherwood to work on this record because nobody had ever reggae-fied any of the old Irish songs. Peggy Gordon is the most gorgeous of the songs. We deliberately set the key very high so that it would sound even more yearning. And no one ever sang a finer version of the Moorlock Shore, Molly Malone, or The Singing Bird. I know it's an awful sin and I'll probably burn in hell for boasting, but it's a very, very good album. I think I'm still a good singer, but I will never be as good a singer as I was when I sang on Faith and Courage and Sean Nos Nua. I was at the age where it was perfect. Also, my relationship with Donal Lunny musically was perfect. He had a great instinct as a producer. We had a brilliant working relationship, brilliant band and brilliant record company. The whole thing worked really well. It's for a niche market, I guess. The record was number 1 in Ireland for a very long time. Throw Down Your Arms. In 2005, I was lucky enough to go to Kingston, Jamaica, and record Throw Down Your Arms with Sly and Robbie, Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare, and the most incredible band on earth. I got to perform some of my favourite and most inspirational songs, which are all very male Rastafari numbers. I had the time of my life in Kingston with a friend of mine who was very gay for 3 weeks. At the time in Jamaica, you got 10 years hard labour for being gay, so I had to keep poking my friend's chin to make his mouth close every time he was staring at the lovely looking men. And he was having an affair in our hotel room, which we were sharing, with one of the hotel's waiters, and the poor waiter kept thinking I was my friend's wife. We recorded at Tough Gong, And again, we made great music and smoked so much weed. Myself and Robbie Shakespeare fell quite in love, and we had a big old affair. Later, when we toured for the album, myself and Robbie had a big bed in the back of the tour bus. We just loved these shows, but we were very in love with each other as well. Indeed, I loved everybody in the band. They were calling me Mommy because I used to look after them a lot. My favourite song on Throw Down Your Arms is Prophet Has Arise, which was written by the great Jamaican reggae trio Israel Vibration. It gets me off the floor no matter how miserable I am. I later got to sing with Israel Vibration in Brixton Academy one night when my friend Benjamin Zephaniah was performing there, and it was an incredibly moving experience. I got to hold the lead singer's hand and sing those songs from Israel Vibration that I love. Did a lot of songs by the Jamaican roots musician Burning Spear too on Throw Down Your Arms, because I love that man so much. I also learned an important lesson. Never leave your weed in the dressing room when there's a band full of Rastas there. It'll be gone when you return. When I made Throw Down Your Arms, I was a bit beaten down, to be honest. Bad stuff had been going on in my life. It was part of what led me into the spiritual arena. I also felt so strongly about making Throw Down Your Arms, I paid $400,000 of my own money for the record's production. I was heading towards my next record, Theology, which is an album, believe it or not, that I had wanted to make since I was 7 years old. Throw Down Your Arms was very much the precursor to Theology, which I also paid for personally. I can't remember how much that one cost me. Theology. Around the year 2000, I went to college for a brief period to study theology. The books of the prophets were where my passion lay. We had the most beautiful teacher, a priest, who was able to bring God off the page when he was discussing the prophets, particularly Jeremiah. He'd be going, my poor people, and his eyes would be streaming tears. I wanted to do the same thing musically that he was doing when he was teaching, bringing God off the page. Let everyone see the humanity of God, the vulnerability, the moodiness, the emotionality. One day I was reading the Song of Solomon quietly to myself while I was waiting for class to start, and the teacher came in and bashed his finger on the book and said, "You should be writing songs about that." And so he inspired my record, Theology. I'd really been thinking about it for a long time, but I didn't know how to realise it. There's a very fine line between corny and cool when it comes to writing religious songs, and I grew up in the 1970s with all these terrible charismatic Christian songs on the airwaves, so I didn't want to risk making that mistake. Theology is the only album of mine I'm taking to the coffin. I love it. I took virtually all the lyrics from scripture. I made one side just acoustic and the other with a full band because I couldn't make my mind up which one I liked best. Same songs, different covers. The way I worked was that I laid down on the floor huge pieces of paper and I wrote down all of the lines that I loved that were in the scriptures and decided to put them together and not change them, but make them rhyme where I could. And there are some beautiful songs already written by God in the scriptures. Something Beautiful is the first song. It kind of declares my reason for wanting to make the record, and it describes a true story of a time that I stole a Bible, which I do think should be free. Something Beautiful is the one exception to the all-scripture presentation, while Out of the Depths comes from one of the Psalms. Dark I Am Yet Lovely is from the Song of Solomon. If You Had a Vineyard comes from the book of Isaiah. Watcher of Men is the book of Job, which is very difficult to make rhyme and fit into 3 minutes. I made a different version of The Rivers of Babylon than people are used to hearing, and I love my version, not because of me, but because it's beautiful, the words of it, the sentiment of people breaking their guitars because their tormentors require songs. It's not the most friendly of psalms. There's an awful lot of baby bashing and all. Whomsoever Dwells is Psalm 91. I learned the Psalms in the Judaic way, where there are magical uses of the Psalms, and how you use them with certain names of God. Psalm 91 is a bullet stopper. The record company hassled me into putting I Don't Know How to Love Him on the album. I love that song, but it doesn't belong here. I also made a bad choice with We People Who Are Darker Than Blue. Theology was produced by my friend Graham Bolger and also Steve Cooney. Graham, at the time, had had a terrible accident on my birthday, actually, in which he had slipped off his motorbike, crashed, and became paraplegic. My place had a bungalow, and I invited him to stay there, which he did. Getting together and making this record was a good thing for him because he was going through such a terribly depressing time. Graham, Steve, and I were able to meet up every day and make the music. It let Graham see that life was still going to continue. Graham is still a very good friend and somebody I love very much. We all had a really beautiful experience making Theology, another reason why it remains so very, very special. I love performing these songs live, and as I said, if I go out in a coffin, it's the only record I'm bringing with me to heaven, in the hope that it will make up for what a complete piece of shit I am the rest of the time.